Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our first Paralympic podcast, which is featuring Hannah Russel. For those of you that haven't met me yet, I'm David and I'm from British Blind Sport. If I could sort of ask you first just to mute your microphones for the duration of the podcast. And if you do have a question, you can submit them one or two ways. So the first way that you can ask your question is just raise your hand and then I'll invite you to ask Hannah your question. And the second option is to use our chat service on Zoom and just submit your questions through there and then I can put those to Hannah. Okay, so thank you for joining us today, Hannah. If you could firstly just start off by telling us a little bit about what you do and sort of your sports background.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Hannah Russel. I'm a British Paralympic swimmer and my most recognisable achievement to date is winning 2 Paralympic gold medals at the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. So I'm a current world record holder in the 100 metre backstroke, and currently, due to the pandemic, I've been training at home. So I've had to try and really, go out my comfort zone and think how I can continue my training whilst being at home.
Fantastic, Hannah. So the first question that I've got for you, based on how you actually became involved in swimming, could you explain what age it was you started and what sort of drove you to continue on that path to where you are today?
So I was born with my visual impairment. I can only see up to 0.5 of a metre in my central sight, and I come from quite a sporty family. So my dad used to play rugby, my mum's a PE teacher, so I was sort of put into that sporting aspect, and when I was younger I got put into the pool just out of leisure really, and absolutely loved the water. It was somewhere which I felt really safe. And from that point onwards, I started to go to a local swimming club when I was 4, so I learned to swim at the age of 4. And from there, I was spotted through a scheme called Playground to Podium, and that basically spotted athletes on that programme who had the potential to take their sport further. So when I was younger, I did train with able-bodied athletes, so I had a visual impairment, yet I was, training amongst other athletes who, had full sight. So when I was at a regional meet, when I was, I think I was around 13, they spotted me and noticed, that my turns, my finishes weren't great, and they knew that I had the visual impairment. And yeah, I got spotted and then got my national classification, and then international classification into Paralympic swimming, where I was classed as an S12 swimmer, and pretty much didn't look back from there. So that was in 2010 when I got classified, and I made my first international debut in 2011, and that was in Berlin at the European Championships. So from that point onwards, we're now in 2020, so I've had 9 years of international competition, including 2 Paralympic Games.
Fantastic, Hannah. My second question for you, obviously, you've mentioned you won 2 Paralympic gold, you hold a world record, you've also been awarded an MBE.
Yeah.
But what is your biggest achievement to date, in your personal opinion?
I'd say for me, my biggest achievement would be winning my my gold medal in my 100 metre backstroke. So for 13 years, I had trained day in, day out, 5 o'clock starts in the morning. So, it was a whole effort from my family, my coaches, everything was all going towards Rio. And I kept, that was my dream. I wanted to become Paralympic champion. And the fact that I broke the world record whilst winning the gold medal, and then having my family and my coaches and everyone who, really made that possible around me, just made it that extra bit special.
That's great. You've mentioned that your family, were there for your Rio experience. So growing up what was or who was your biggest inspiration? Did you have any sporting stars that you looked up to or anything like that?
So I actually was inspired to take up my swimming further by Rebecca Adlington and Ellie Simmons. So I remember very well in 2008, I was on a holiday with my family and I was sitting in front of the TV watching the Paralympic and Olympic Games in Beijing. And I obviously saw Ellie and Rebecca achieve their gold medals at the Games. And I turned around to my parents saying, that's what I want to do, that's what I want to achieve. And they took that on board. And I'd say inspirations outside of swimming is my family, my parents. I've always looked up to them and they've done everything possible to help me get to where I am today in my sport. They were the ones who drove me to early morning training, to all my sessions, to make sure that it was possible that I was able to continue my training.
That's fantastic. So just while we're on sort of the subject of training, what would sort of the average day for a competitive swimmer look like? Obviously, I know we're in this situation with COVID at this present time. So if you could explain what you would normally follow as your training schedule and sort of how you've adapted that during the situation with COVID at the moment.
So typically, a life in my day, I guess. So I train around 6 hours a day. So I typically get up at 5:30. I train in the pool for 2 hours in the morning. I do a gym session, which takes up to 2 hours in the late morning. And then I'd return back to the pool at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to do another 2 hour swim session. So all in all, I do around 6 hours a day, hit or miss. I train 6 days a week, so I always have Sundays off. That's a complete rest day for all of us, just to make sure that, we're refreshed and we have that rest to enable us to start a new week fresh. COVID, obviously, that's sort of changed my training. So there isn't really a sport which compares to swimming out there. So initially when I started, I was very fortunate. Prior to the lockdown, I was able to get hold of a watt bike. So for me, obviously, cycling on a road isn't safe for me at all. And a tandem bike, that's something which I don't own, but a watt bike is something which I've done in my previous training already. So basically, for those who don't know what a watt bike is, it's a static bike which you can place in any room, and it's similar to a treadmill where you can change the levels of intensity just by moving this little this small device on the side of it to increase the intensity. So that's what I used at the start of lockdown, and I continued that and progressed my training, because the biggest thing for an athlete, especially through lockdown, was to try and maintain that aerobic base. That's something, especially for a swimmer, which you lose straight away, obviously, if you're not in the pool. So that was something which I really, really focused on. Outside of that, the communication from British Swimming has been really, really good over the duration of the lockdown. We've been doing lots of Zoom calls, we've been doing FaceTimes, lots of different ways of communication, obviously because we've not been able to see each other face to face. So I've had remote gym sessions. So typically I'd go to a strength and conditioning gym, like a leisure centre, to do my gym sessions, where I normally train. But obviously with everything being closed, I created a home gym. So that was quite fun to do. I got some equipment online and then created my home gym outside. So I went on Zoom calls. I had my S&C coach on the call, so he could actually watch me do my S&C, so all my exercises, to make sure that I'm doing it safely and with the best technique. So that was really different, but it was quite a nice way to do my training. And then more of recent, so my family home's in Surrey, it's based down south, and I was there for the duration of 12 weeks. I've only just returned back to Manchester. So I'd say in the 6th week whilst I was at home, I got some really positive news. There was a local there's a local hydro pool which is located 5 minutes from my family home, and the company were really, really helpful and really supportive and allowed me to have access to that pool during the rest of lockdown. So what a hydro pool is, it's a training hydro pool. So it's basically an endless swimming pool which you're tethered to. So you have a bungee cord and you're attached to the bungee cord, and it's a similar concept with, you know, the watt bike and a treadmill, where there's jets coming towards you and the flumes, but you can change the intensity of those flumes. You can make it harder, easier, and it's very similar in that way to a treadmill. So I trained in that for 3 days a week, and that really boosted my my motivation on that back end of the lockdown, because, you know, you go through so much, but for me, I just really want to be back in the pool. I want to feel that water. So that was something which definitely had a massive perk.
That's fantastic, Hannah. So our next question we've had submitted by Glyn Dodds. So I'd like to invite them to ask you the question now, if they're happy to. Glyn, are you happy to ask Hannah your question, or would you like me to ask it for you?
You can ask it. They might not understand me.
Okay, not a problem. So the question from Glyn, Hannah, is: have you ever experienced any negative experiences through your journey? For example, people asking if you're safe to be in a pool, or were you able to follow lane etiquette, for example?
So I guess for me, like in relation to the lane etiquette, I'll just base on that first. Obviously, with me having a visual impairment from birth, I had to adapt to things quite a lot. So me being in a pool, it took me years of practice to try and, you know, navigate my way around the pool. For me, what I use now is my stroke count. So for me to safely get from one end to another, I count my strokes. So for example, one of my races is 50-meter freestyle. And for me to get from one end of the pool to the other, it takes 38 strokes to get there. And for me, that's so important, that feel for the water and making sure I hit that wall on that stroke. If I don't, then there is the danger of me, you know, like crashing into the wall and stuff like that. But the feel of the water is something which I really go by. Obviously, because I have limited sight, that's something which I have heightened, I guess. You know, like my feel for the water is something which makes me aware of where I am in the pool. Negative experiences, I guess, you know, I've had some negative experiences throughout my career. There's always highs and lows. No athlete honestly could go through their career always having positives, I guess. But people put, you know, like smiles on their face and they just, you know, more or less get on with it. But for me, I had a coach which didn't treat me very well. I was bullied by one of my coaches, but that was sort of like recognised very early on and was sorted. A few other athletes were involved in that as well. So they were facing something similar to me, but, you know, that didn't allow me to stop my dreams, even though they may have not had the belief in me. I thought to myself, why did I start? Like, I absolutely loved the sport, and I had that dream of achieving a gold medal at the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games, and that's what I was striving towards. So I, you know, put that to one side, all the negativity into one box, put it over my shoulder, and just focused forwards. And, you know, I proved them wrong, and that for me, you know, having that belief is something which I've kept with me since that day, really. And there's always going to be people who try and stop you from achieving, but you don't have to have that in your way. You can, you know, if you believe, you can achieve. That's a motto which I live by day in, day out. You know, if you have that dream, then you can achieve it no matter what. Like, no matter what anyone says, as long as you put your mind to it, then you can definitely achieve it. And that's what I was able to do at Rio.
That's a very inspiring message, Hannah. Our next question is from Colin. So I'd like to invite Colin to ask his question.
Yeah, hi, Hannah and everyone. I'm Colin. I know nothing about competitive swimming, so forgive me, but what sort of diet do you have to use? Is there lots of advice you get about diet, either generally or before or during the training running up to a game? And do you use any sort of wearable technology to monitor your swims and record, you know, any stats and stuff like that?
So thank you for that question. There's actually quite a lot of things, you know, regarding nutrition which goes on behind the scenes. So I've got a sports nutritionist as part of GB Paraswimming, and I'm in contact with her every single week. And what we do is she sits down with me and we go through and plan my diet. So for a swimmer, it's really important that you try and minimize as much body fat as you can, because if you can think that when you're swimming in the water, the more fat you typically sink. So that's something which we work on. And the way how we measure body fat is by doing skin folds. So what the GB nutritionist does is she uses skin calipers, which sort of pinches the fat and measures it, and it's sort of all related to your body weight as well. And there's sort of like, I guess, zones which you need to try and hit and try and stay in and maintain in certain aspects of the year. So my year, like not at any point of the year do you need to be the same body fat. So for example, in winter training, like when we're doing a lot of high volume, we're advised to have a little bit more fat you know, in our system to just help us maintain the level of training we're doing. But obviously when we get closer to a competition, then that has to be reduced down because we're getting ready to race and we need to be, you know, in the best shape possible. So another thing which we do is we'll sort of focus on aspects of the diet to try and minimize the body fat. So carbohydrates, proteins, fats, all sorts of things like that. So it's all in relation to your body weight, but trying to just have the energy intake and expenditure, trying to really focus on those aspects. There's quite a lot which goes on in that area, and for me, I think it's really important, especially being a sprint athlete. So an endurance athlete may not have to really focus on it as much, but for me as a sprinter, you want to get from one end to another as quickly as possible, and having, you know, more drag, that is sort of a negative. So that's something I always have to really, really focus on. As far as, like, I guess, biomechanics and trying to measure stuff when we swim, we've got quite a lot of technology. It's very high tech. Thankfully, just quickly, I did a sports science degree. So I'm trying to understand, you know, the basic aspects of what goes into the training. So I know a lot about the physical side. But, you know, the other side, and the theory side, is something which I lacked when I was younger, and doing my university degree has definitely helped me have a bit of an eye-opener as to why we do certain things in biomechanics, psychology and nutrition and stuff like that. So we have like heart rate monitors. We do a lot of tests in the pool. So we have like force tests, we have movement tests, power tests and stuff like that. So it's very technical, but it's all very much trying to get those marginal gains. That's something which British paraswimming, you know, stress about. It's very much when you get older, especially more so to my age in swimming, you know, you've got a lot of the bulk behind you, but it's all about those marginal gains. And that's why we do a lot about nutrition, biomechanics and stuff like that, just to try and get ahead of the game and ahead of the world.
Thank you
Hopefully
for your question.
Hopefully that answers it.
My next question for
No,
you,
thanks
Hannah.
for that. That's great.
Sorry, Colin. My next question for you, Hannah, is we've touched on your training schedule, a little bit of your diet and some of the technology involved. So as we build into competition, do you have any sort of pre-competition rituals that you feel like you have to do before an event?
So I guess like I only have sort of like one superstition, I should call it. I have a particular meal which I always will have before a major competition, just because I've you know, like I've swam really well off it, and that's spaghetti bolognese. I always have it. But I'm not a fussy eater, but that's just something which I like to have. And apart from that, you know, going into a competition, I like to be very organised. Prior to a race, we have like a heat in the morning and a final in the evening. So we have our pre-pool, which is the first element of warming up before we get in the pool. So that involves you know, warming up your muscles by either first of all releasing and then stretching and doing some activation, because, you know, if you just jump in the pool on the side, your muscles aren't warm and they're at risk of injury. So that's something which they're quite hot on, and that's something which we implement into our program. And something else which we do, there's supplements which none of them are banned. It's all like to help aid performance and support athletes. So there's caffeine and bicarb are two products which I look into, and they sort of help you know, prepare me for races. And then sort of after that, you know, that's when you sort of get in the zone prior to racing and prior to a competition, really. Lots of athletes have their own ways of getting ready, like mentally ready. And for me, I enjoy sort of talking to my coaches, then listening to some music and just having a bit of like downtime before I get on the blocks. Typically when I guess viewers watch, you know, Paralympic athletes or any other athlete on TV or performing, they just see the race, but there is a lot which goes on prior to it.
That's a great answer again, Hannah. Thank you. Our next question comes from Rosie. So I'd like to invite Rosie to ask her a question, please.
Hi, Hannah. Thanks. It's been really good to listen to you. I'm not a swimmer, and I think it's definitely that my sight has got in the way. I did used to swim when I was younger. But I live down in Devon, and we have a 2.5 mile open water swim that I'd really like to attack. And I just wondered if you had any tips on getting started.
So for me, you know, I guess when I started swimming, it was just like the confidence and the enjoyment of it. You know, if you've got I'd probably say reach out to someone who you can, you know, ask questions on how the events run, and making sure that if you need that support, you know, like a guide. So for me, I've done some open water swimming before, and it is quite different to swimming in a pool, because for me, like, I do have those 2 lane lines. I feel safe. In open water swimming, I know for definite that visually impaired and blind athletes or participants, they are required to have a guide. So making sure that, I guess the first step is making sure, you know, like what's out there and how do you get that support. And from there, you know, when you have that support in place, it's, yeah, you'll feel free in the water from there. That's sort of how I feel, knowing the safety's there, and then it's just enjoying it. And I'm sure as soon as you get in, you'll just feel free. It's a sport for me where, you know, sight doesn't matter, like that's completely irrelevant, and you can just feel the water and just, yeah, enjoy it. So I definitely say, like, reach out for support first, because, you know, the safety aspect is important, and I guess open water swimming is a bit different in comparison to like the pool swimming.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question, Rosie?
It did, yeah, that was lovely. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. The next question, I'm going to invite Alex from British Blind Sport. She has a question for you, Hannah.
Hi Hannah, thanks for joining us. My question is, so I don't know if everyone else is the same, but I'm finding it really hard to stay motivated at the moment, especially during lockdown. I think there's like a lack of routine. You seem like a very dedicated athlete. It's clear from your achievements. So what I wanted to know is, how do you stay motivated and dedicated, and how do you keep focused towards your ambitions, and especially during lockdown?
So I guess lockdown for me, it has had its challenges, as you know, like a typical year in training, you have your ups and downs, but it's trying to find all those positives which overlay the negatives, really. So for me, what we did as a British swimming, so I'm part of the National Performance Centre in Manchester, and we as sort of like a group, aside from the main para swimming group, we set up a WhatsApp group, we set up weekly Zoom calls. And so another thing, as you said, like a routine's really important. And first of all, for me, like not having a routine, I was like, oh, like it sort of like hit me, because I love having a routine, but I had to really take ownership. So I think for me, ownership is a big thing, which I've had to, I guess I've learned about myself really. Like I can have that ownership if I get put in that position. I've created my own routines and my own timelines, and weekly structured plans. So I actually send them to my coach. It's not my coach sending it to me. And I think that's really helped. I've tried new hobbies. So obviously I've not been swimming in a pool. I've been doing different things, like different varied exercise sort of routines, but I've also used this time to try out new hobbies. I tried some dancing, for example, which was very different, but it was just fun. It's just something different. I've tried some baking. I've watched, like more films, more series, stuff like that. Things which I've not really been able to do whilst I've been doing full training. This is the first time which, in a very long time, I can't even remember, where I've actually had, some free time and just to sort of sit back and really like reflect and to be able to do things which maybe I've not been able to try before. So yeah, definitely trying like new things has been one thing for me. And like really appreciating everything in life is something which has kept me motivated, and being with family and just having that time which maybe I wouldn't have. Well, I definitely wouldn't have that time if I was training up in Manchester, because I would be 3 hours from my family. So there's sort of like lots of different things for me which have kept me motivated, but definitely having a routine and sort of taking that ownership, and then having those Zoom calls which I mentioned prior to that. It's nice to stay in contact with people, even though you can't see them face to face. It's nice to just be able to hear people's voices. I definitely think Zoom's gonna go a long way after this lockdown.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Alex. Hannah, the next question that I was going to touch on, after you've mentioned about some of your other hobbies that you've sort of done during this lockdown, have you ever sort of participated in any other sports? And if so, do you take part in any of those still now?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Sorry. So I was just going to touch on if you'd ever participated in any other sports as well as your swimming.
I guess when I was younger, when I was at school, I did some running. I wasn't the best runner, but it was just something different. Apart from that, I've sort of always stuck with swimming. As far as competitive sport, that's the sport which I've always done. I'm quite interested in cycling, so that's if I had that opportunity to ever sort of have a taster session and see what it's like, that would be a sport which I'd be interested in doing.
Fantastic. Potentially a triathlon on the cards as well then. A little bit of running background there, and then the interest in cycling. My next question that I've got for you, Hannah, is sort of to find out a little bit about you out of the pool. So what you like to do on your rest days when you're not training. What sort of activities do you get up to?
So outside of training, I'm quite a social person. So I enjoy being with family, spending time with friends. So I've actually just moved into a new flat. So it's a big step for me, because last year I was living with my auntie and uncle, and finally this year, I feel ready, and I'm living in a flat on my own. So that's a big step, but I'm really excited to sort of start that journey. So being in Manchester now, I've got a lot of family up here, so I will intend to spend time with them. I enjoy going shopping, doing a bit of baking, watching series. They're sort of things which I like to do to wind down, because I do have busy days with training. It's just trying to find those things which I enjoy doing just to chill out a little bit.
Thank you for that, Hannah. I'd like to invite anyone who's on our panel today that to ask Hannah any questions they may have. So is there anyone who'd like to ask a question?
I've got a question.
Hi, Luke.
Hello. So being visually impaired and using technology now that we've got all this stuff, in competitive sport, I think there's a lot of like publicity and everything. How do you get around that, using this technology and like talking to other people over online?
So I guess I've actually had a little bit of a struggle. You know, typically for me, being face to face with people, and especially demonstrations in my sport in swimming, that's sort of the way how I go by things on Zoom, which is the new normality at the moment. Obviously, the small, as I'm sure you can see on this call, there's like smaller cameras and like smaller views, and I do struggle with that. So it's the verbal communication which I've had to stress to a lot of people, because I've had some, so for example, we have on a Friday, sometimes we'll have like a Pilates session or a yoga session, and I've had to put my hand up and say, look, like I'm struggling here, just because I can't see the movement on the screen. So they've had to adapt it to be like more verbal communication, just to make sure that I do receive the amount of communication everyone else is, just in a different way. So that's been something different, but people have really like taken on board that.
Thank you.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Luke. Our next question comes from Simon. So, Simon, if you'd like to ask your question to Hannah.
Thanks. Hi, Hannah. I'm assuming you had qualified for Tokyo, and obviously it's been put back a year. So I was going to ask, what's your racing schedule like for the rest of this year? And are you still qualified for next year, or do you have to go for another qualifying period?
Okay, so that's a good question, because some of it's uncertain at the moment. So the lockdown obviously happened or begun at the end of March. Now, we were 2 weeks away from our trials. So our Paralympic trials were being held in Sheffield in April. So we were literally 2 weeks away. Everyone was, you know, getting ready to race at trials, and then all of a sudden it's been postponed, it's been cancelled. So we as a para swimming team, none of us actually have qualified yet for Tokyo. So I think they're in the process at the moment, or especially in the future really, they'll have to redo the policy of how athletes qualify for the Tokyo Games, because it is going to be slightly different. There's a lot of background work which goes on, so you know, like the world rankings and stuff like that, of how people get the qualifying times and what times they have to hit. So yeah, no one as of yet is sort of on the plane to Tokyo. So this next year, so as I previously mentioned, I've just moved into a new flat in Manchester. The downfall, you know, at the moment, leisure centres are closed. So tomorrow, a lot of places are going to be reopened, such as bars, pubs, restaurants, hairdressers, stuff like that. But unfortunately, the swimming pools didn't have that green light. Although elite athletes, they've managed to open up a pool in East Manchester under special circumstances for those athletes who meet the criteria to, you know, slowly begin training again. So on Monday, I have been given the green light to start training. So that's literally the first step. So from the government, you would have seen there's like 5 phases. So we sort of had that similar thing in swimming. We're in phase 1 starting Monday, and we'll slowly get back to a full training program really. So it's sort of like a new normality which will happen, you know, starting Monday, and then it's just really listening to the guidelines. As of yet, we don't know what's happening with our year. All I know is that there's no competitions which can be held until December. I know there's no international competition until at least the new year. but hopefully things get moving quite quickly.
Thank you for that question, Simon. Our next question, I'm going to open up to Rosie P. We've got two Rosies on the call, so I'll get to the other Rosies just afterwards.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks very much. So I guess my question is just around kind of, you've talked a lot about training, competitions, how you've been kind of coping and thriving in the lockdown, that kind of thing. I guess what I was wondering is, how do you manage as like somebody who competes in sport, how do you manage the lows and the highs of competition? Not so much, lows of, maybe not kind of achieving what you'd hoped to achieve, but more so the lows of, if you are at a competition, you've put in months of work on the lead up, and then you achieve what you set out to achieve, and then all of a sudden it's 7 a.m. the next morning and there's not really kind of that thing to work towards anymore. So I guess I just wonder how you kind of manage that.
So for me, like, I guess I've been fortunate in the way that I always do goal setting. So I work with the GB psychologist on a weekly basis, and my psychology and sort of working on that has been like really important for me, because I have had, sometimes when I'm racing, races haven't gone my way, and for me being so competitive and having like such high aspirations, I've struggled in those situations. So trying to figure out how to overcome that is something which I've always worked on really hard, and I guess just like, as I said previously, like goal setting is something which I really focus on. So after Rio, as an example, I'd achieved my 2 gold medals, and that was, for me, that's the highest sort of achievement you can achieve in Paralympic swimming, winning a gold medal. So, you sort of think, oh, like, what else can I achieve? And I remember thinking to myself, I want to go on to my 3rd Paralympic Games, and that sort of like was my motivation to carry on and trying to retain and like double what I've achieved now, going into Tokyo. So just goal setting, I think, is something which is key for me.
That's great. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you for that, Rosie. I'd like to invite the other Rosie now to ask her question. She's been waiting a little while now, so apologies.
Hi. You mentioned that you've been training on a watt bike. I've had my sister with me during lockdown, so we've been running, but she's just moved away. So I've been looking at watt bikes and the Peloton as well, and I just wondered which watt bike you had and how accessible it was.
So I had the Watt Bike Pro trainer. So that's more of the, I guess, like one of the newer styles of the watt bike. As far as accessibility to get it, as of now, obviously, a lot of gyms are closed at the moment, so trying to access it at this moment in time it seems challenging, because I'm actually trying to see if I can get a watt bike up in Manchester, but I'm sort of waiting patiently. As far as like actual accessibility of using it, it's really easy. For me, what I do on the watt bike, there is a screen which sort of shows like your heart rate and like how many watts you're producing and stuff like that. I can't see that because it's miles away. It's like quite far away. So I actually have a Fitbit which records my heart rate and my intensity and what zones I hit. So for me, that's been my lifesaver through lockdown, because I've just had to adapt it, but I still receive that same information. But I definitely recommend the watt bike as a training aid. It's so easy to use, and you get a lot out of it.
Okay, thank you.
Our next question comes from Scarlett, and that's in the chat service. So Scarlett, would you like to ask Hannah your question?
Hi Hannah, I was just wondering, how do you balance your education, swimming and social life?
So obviously, well, I guess with my usual swimming routine, it's quite busy. I don't get too much time for a social life, although being such a social person, it's really important I do really utilize that time. So outside of my swimming routine, I'll like see my friends, see my family. And what I'm quite fortunate with is that a lot of my friends and family, have understood, like the intensity of my training, how much I train, and they try and work around me, which I'm very, very grateful for. So an example right now is I'm in Manchester. I've got all my university friends in Manchester, and we're sort of waiting to arrange a catch up, and they're sort of waiting for me to tell them when I'm free, because they know it can be quite difficult. So yeah, like I'm just grateful for like the understanding of that support. But I like to go out and about. I do have to go out my comfort zone sometimes to get to places, but it's all about exploring and having that confidence.
Thank you.
The next question I have for you, Hannah, is if you could give your younger self a single piece of advice, what would that be?
I'd always say believe in yourself and to be happy. Don't worry about what other people think, and just to be who you are, really. I guess I've like merged things into one, but for me, believing in yourself and doing what you want to do in life is really, really important. And if you believe, you can achieve. And like I experienced quite a bit of bullying throughout my childhood going into my college, so I had to strive towards that and just forget about that and remember who I am, and just to try and be happy with it, with what you're doing. I'd say happiness and believing in yourself is really, really important, really key.
Thank you, Hannah. And the next question I have for you is, what are your goals and ambitions for your life after competitive swimming?
So I am in quite a fortunate position. I did a BSc honours degree in sports science. So aside my swimming career, I completed a university degree. I graduated last year with a first class honours. So I was very, very happy with my achievement there. Going on from that, I've always been very interested in being a primary school teacher. So that's something which I look forward to doing outside, or I guess after my swimming career. With having my university degree sort of under my belt already, I'd need to do a postgrad. So I'd have to do a PGCE or teacher training on the job to be a qualified teacher. And for those who might be interested, obviously me being partially sighted and registered blind, how would I be a primary school teacher, or how is it safe for me to be a primary school teacher, is something which lots of people have asked me. I've got a cousin who's a primary school teacher, and what they do is they do like an assessment, and if you're the main teacher in the class, then you'll have your own support teacher, if that makes sense. So like you're the main teacher teaching, but there's someone else in the classroom to make sure they're watching over the children, like like they're the eyes, if that makes sense, of the class. So you have like an extra support teacher. So because I remember when I was younger, that was something which I really, really wanted to do, and I did have those questions being like, oh, like, can you do that? Is that possible, or is it safe? And like my cousin said, yeah, like it is safe, there's just a procedure you need to go down.
Fantastic, Hannah, and congratulations on your degree.
Thank you.
I'd like to open up any questions that anyone else may have, so feel free to raise your hand or just pop it in the chat service and we'll fire away to Hannah.
Hi, Hannah. So can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sorry.
Hi. I was going to ask, have you decided on your events for Tokyo next year, what events you would like to do, or is there events that you would you're best at which you would prefer not to do, or you know, are your best events your favourite events? Kind of what I'm asking.
Yeah.
And also, is there any sort of relays for your category, or do Britain have a team for the relays?
So to answer your first part of the question, my main event's the 100 metre backstroke S12, which is my classification. So I'll be doing that race as my primary race, and I've also got the 50 metre freestyle. But on that event this time round, I have to swim upper class. So I'm swimming up to an S13 in that class, which basically means I'm swimming with those athletes who have more sight. And then I will be swimming the S12 100 metre freestyle. So those 3 races will be my predominant races in Tokyo, fingers crossed. And then there are other races which I could possibly enter, but for me, it's trying to really focus on those main events. So as I mentioned sort of earlier on in this call, the marginal gains is really important and crucial. So, you know, you need to try and really think, do you need to swim that event? As I'd say, like the secondary events, which aren't my main events, like would that sort of have a negative impact in me achieving in my main event? So it's all trying to figure those things out, but definitely those 3 events. The second part of your question is something which, you know, like, I guess you've seen on the Paralympic Games, there's the 34-point relay, which is a physical impairment race. And they are introducing the 60-point relay, which is for those athletes with a visual impairment. So in the visual impairment classes in swimming, there's S11, which is completely blind, S12, and then S13. So it's very much the way how it works is you add the numbers up. So you know, like a 12 plus a 13 plus an 11 plus an 11, like you have to make 60. Well, you don't have to make 60, you just can't go over 60 to create a relay. Although, as it currently stands, we don't have enough visually impaired athletes on the team which sort of hit the criteria to swim in a relay. At the moment, we've got, there's myself and Stephen Clegg who've been at Paralympics, who, you know, would be eligible to do that relay, but we need some other visually impaired athletes. So I stress that we're always looking for up and compared athletes, which I know there are a lot of on British swimming programmes at the moment. So it's an exciting time to see what they can do in competitions in the future, and fingers crossed they can join us and we can create a relay.
Thank you.
Our next question, Hannah, comes also from Hannah from BBS. So over to you, Hannah.
Hello. I wanted to know how getting your MBE, how the experience was of being awarded your MBE. What was the ceremony like? Was it, I would be bricking it, so in case I did something wrong or something that's against the law? How did you find it?
It was very nerve-wracking, personally. So I remember, I'll just briefly go back to where I actually found out that I received the MBE honours. So in the New Year's honours, the Queen obviously selects those who she's awarding, and I received the letter in November. I remember receiving it in November, and you had to keep it a secret. Like, I couldn't tell anyone for like a good month and a half, which was really, really hard. Although you get 3 invitations to the palace as well, so I was able to thankfully bring my whole family. So my sister, my mum and my dad attended my MBE ceremony, which was really, really special. When we got there, what happened is we went into like a massive drawing room, like the main drawing room in the palace, and then we had someone who took us through the ceremony and how it was going to work. And yeah, we had to be taught how to curtsy and how to like walk up to, I guess, up to the top of the building to like receive the MBE I received mine from Prince Philip, I think. Yeah. And anyway, it was absolutely like out of this world. It was so surreal. I remember shaking, but you had to like walk. You had to walk up in a manner like you couldn't get it wrong. If you got it wrong, like it could muck up the whole ceremony, and it's all recorded. But yeah, it was such a good day. But no, it was something very special, but nerve-wracking at the same time.
Yeah, I can imagine, hugely. Thank you, that sounds really cool.
You had to try and go up the steps as well. You had to walk up these steps before you got to the top. And I was like, I can't trip, like do not trip. Just try and like be steady on your feet. So yeah.
Did you have heels on?
I did, yes, I did.
That would make
it made it a bit more challenging, but thankfully it was okay. They were aware that of my sight impairment. I made that quite clear because, you know, knowing where to go, it was, yeah, I didn't want to be like pointed out and be like, oh, like she doesn't know where she's going. But no, they were really, really helpful. All the staff around made sure that it was the smoothest process going.
Cool, thank you.
Our final question is coming from Rosie P. So I'd like Rosie, if you'd like to ask your questions, Hannah.
Yeah, thanks very much. So Hannah, obviously you've went through quite a lot on the chat already. I just wondered, you know, when you've finished your competition as either an individual or part of a team, what's the go-to celebration? Like, do you guys do you go for cheeky Nando's? Do you do like a team chant? Like, what's the score there?
So there's like a few things which you can do, I guess, after a competition. When we're in competition, they're very, very strict with the rules. So for example, us over 18s, like if you get caught drinking or smoking or anything like that's you gone, that's you out of the competition and sent home. What happens on the last night is that the rules uplifted. So once everyone's competed, the last race is done, the closing ceremony's been done, then the National Performance Director, he will uplift the rule and we're allowed to enjoy ourselves for that night. We might have a curfew at around, I don't know, maybe midnight or something like that. But yeah, like we can go out, we can have a drink, just celebrate, you know, because throughout the year of training, it's so, you know, like we're so focused on that one event, you know, we won't drink, we have to eat really well and have like be, you know, really focused on what we're doing. And that's our one day to let our hair down and just celebrate. And normally, well, fingers crossed, everyone's done what they wanted to do at the competition. So it makes the celebration even more special. Although I love that actually, sorry, for the under 18s, it's a bit different, obviously, with the drinking situation. What they will do is, you know, they'll set up like a massive movie night for them or a takeaway, like have pop and stuff like that in the rooms and stuff like, and everything to make sure that they, you know, don't miss out. They have as much as a celebration as we do, just in a different style.
That's great. Thanks very much.
So I'd like to thank you, Hannah, for your time today and for answering all of those questions, and thank everybody as well for participating. I'd like to obviously apologise if we didn't get a chance to ask Hannah any of your questions, and if you do have any, if you'd like to email me on david@britishblindsport.org.uk and I will pass those on to Hannah. We do have our next podcast scheduled for Friday the 17th of July, and we're going to have Noel Thatcher joining us, so please tune in then. So thanks again, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.